Let's make a beginner-friendly stained glass sun catcher pattern. My name is Jen, and I've been teaching myself how to make stained glass at home. I took one lead cane stained glass class at a local community club and completely fell in love with the art. So I immediately went home and began purchasing everything I needed to continue my journey at home. I've been documenting the entire process and sharing what I've learned along the way. If you're new here, welcome, and thank you for joining my stained glass journey. And if you've been following me, thank you for being here because so many of you have been so wonderful and encouraging in the moments when I needed it the most. Okay, let's get into it. This was my 5th attempt at making stained glass, and I'm going to be completely honest with you in saying that this was the project where it felt like everything sort of started to come together. There was this aha moment, and it was the first time where I really felt like I was getting the hang of things. Now, I have to say that during this project, I still had the incorrect tools, which I'll talk about, and I was using the browsers completely wrong without knowing it. To feel so accomplished when I lacked so much of the knowledge just sort of confirmed for me that this is a beginner-friendly project. And I feel comfortable saying that because the second project I ever made was a pattern I ordered that was quite literally impossible to cut without a saw. Here is one thing that I learned about patterns before we get into the project itself. The people selling them don't tell you when you need a saw or special tools and techniques to actually create them. It's one of the most frustrating parts about learning stained glass when you don't know how to spot those details and just assume that if it's being sold as a stained glass pattern, the person who created it must know what they're doing. But this video is not about my gripe with patterns, it's about this pattern specifically. And this one really does check all of the boxes. You have to work with curves, but not curves that are extremely difficult to learn how to handle, straight lines, and it was the perfect piece to do an edge on. I've done this pattern twice now, and during this video you'll see that I use U-came, but on my second attempt at this pattern I actually practiced my beaded edge. I like the look of the cane better, and if you keep the corners straight to do a zinc frame on there, you can, but it was also the perfect pattern to practice the beaded edge for any beginners watching this because it's flat. Well, in my case, the corners were rounded, but it was perfect to get a feel of how that beaded edge was really supposed to work. Part of this pattern I traced, and part of this pattern I used sticker paper for. I believe this was my second time using sticker paper in general, and I really didn't understand to kind of plan ahead and know which glass I was going to use in case I needed a piece reversed, so that's why I traced it as well as used the sticker paper. And in full disclosure, since I am a beginner myself, I honestly went back to just tracing after this because I felt like the sticker paper didn't allow me to fully get comfortable with the cutting tools and the motions. I know that either way my cuts would have been terrible and I'd have to recut some of the pieces, but the paper sort of inhibited my ability to learn how to use the tools themselves and just get comfortable with the motions. Now, at the time of me overdubbing this video and this point in my current stained glass journey, I have started to use vinyl and I am in love with it. But I do still recommend when just starting off for those first few projects to trace your pattern. It could just be a personal preference for me, but I really learned so much better from tracing it rather than using that sticker paper. And I think this is the perfect moment to sort of just note that I really do think you should try every technique more than once and do it at different stages of learning stained glass. I wasn't ready for sticker paper or vinyl when I first started out, but only a few short weeks later, the vinyl has helped me create beautiful pieces of stained glass. And I don't know who actually watches the footage that I post, but if you are watching the actual video, you might notice me really struggling with some of the tools. Part of that was because I'm new to stained glass. Feeling comfortable with the tools can take a really long time for some people, and honestly, I don't know if I will ever get to the point where I'll have some sort of aesthetically pleasing videos because my brain works a lot differently. Sometimes I do things backwards or hold the tools in a way that you don't generally see. But in this video specifically, I was struggling mostly because, for one, I didn't know how to use the browsers or how they actually worked. The second biggest reason was that I thought I had ordered running pliers, and it turned out they weren't actually running pliers, or at least not for making stained glass. When it comes to grousers, you have a flat side and a curved side. When you want to use the grousers to break your glass, and I should say a clean break, you want that flat side on the top. I'm also learning that you should get in the habit of pulling rather than trying to twist the glass. Pulling offers cleaner breaks, while twisting or trying to bend in a different direction causes those pesky cracks that always happen in the wrong spots. When you sort of want to eat away at the glass or shatter it into smaller pieces rather than a clean cut, you want to use the curve on the top. I think this is the project when I had my first aha moment of understanding grousers and how they worked. People kept telling me that I was holding them wrong in the comments, but it wasn't until I was actually working on this project that I kind of realized what they were saying or understood what they were saying. And knowing and being able to use the grousers with that flat side on the top significantly helped with breaking the glass. Now the running pliers were a different issue. I don't have a local glass store within 4 hours of me, so I relied on the internet to order supplies. This was before I knew a reputable online shop, so don't come at me, but I was ordering on Amazon and Temu. A lot has changed since then, but at the time, Temu and Amazon had the same products, but Temu was cheaper. So I ordered some supplies on there, including those deceiving running pliers. I kept seeing these videos of people using running pliers to break their glass, and it was so easy and so seamless. Every time I picked up my running pliers, nothing happened. I thought I was just doing something wrong. I even posted about it online to ask for advice, and people thought I just wasn't scoring my line. Like I thought that the running pliers would cut and break my glass at the same time. It wasn't until a wonderful stranger asked what the running pliers actually looked like that I was able to discover I got duped on Temu. As soon as I went to investigate, I went back to that original listing to confirm that I bought the right thing, and wouldn't you know it, the listing had been pulled down and was no longer available. But the description was still up. And sure enough, they had advertised them as running pliers for stained glass, but they were definitely not. I was actually relieved to find out that it was the wrong tool and not just my lack of skill. I was also really grateful for the overall kindness the internet has shown me during this entire process, because posting about how terrible you are at something when you're just starting out to learn a new art is intimidating. People can be cruel, especially on the internet where everyone sort of hides behind their keyboard. So if the person who helped me figure this out ever hears this, thank you for your kindness. In general, the comments were pretty educational and kind. No one was telling me how dumb I was when I posted an update about the running pliers when it was resolved, and instead there were a lot of people supporting me and showing appreciation for sharing what really happened. So that was sort of your not so subtle PSA to encourage you to ask questions if you have them. There are definitely a lot of people, most of which who have been making stained glass for decades and think that their way is the only correct way to do something, that make you feel small, whether it's intentional or not. But for the most part, you're gonna get some positive feedback. Just the other day I posted a video and someone was commenting about how grateful they were to see the other comments because it showed how many people were on the same struggle bus and learning the same lessons. We all start somewhere, and I think as humans, we are so hard on ourselves that we forget what it's like to be terrible at something new. The internet only shows the highlight reels of our lives, so it's important to remember that that's not real life. Okay, sorry. I swear I'm working on not going off on little tangents as I film these longer videos, but I think some sidetracked thoughts are important to share. But let's get back to the Cardinal stained glass pattern itself. Now that we have the tools out of the way, I want to talk about the pattern itself. Here is what I loved about it. It offers a little bit of everything. There are straight lines, curves, straight edges, smaller pieces, larger pieces. It was perfect to learn with. I can confidently say that this is a beginner-friendly stained glass pattern because I was a beginner myself when I first made this pattern, and if I could handle it as my 5th project and have it turning out as clean as it did, I think anyone can do it. I will say that some of the curve pieces of that blue sky were a little bit more tricky for me. I think it goes for all of stained glass that the inside curves are a little bit more difficult to cut than the outer curves. I don't want to say that I wasted a lot of glass because the glass scraps go to someone who makes mosaics, and honestly, you would be amazed at how much of those tiny pieces actually come in handy when you're making stained glass. But I didn't conserve my glass the best that I could have. Honestly, it's something that I still struggle with. I can't quite figure out how to lay out the pattern in a way that I can cut and break it while also saving as much glass as possible. I am definitely better than I was in this video, but I think that it's going to take a lot more experience for me. I think part of it was because when I took my very first class, my instructor kept repeating, take advantage of a straight line, so you didn't have to make that extra cut. So in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, I can eliminate having to make a cut if I just place it here. but I need to let go of that logic because it doesn't really apply to the Tiffany style stained glass that I'm making. I also think it was because every person who took that class had never made stained glass before, so she was kind of trying to help us build that confidence aspect with accuracy in our pieces because we were struggling. When it came to foiling this piece, I still was not great at it, but I had improved significantly from my first few pieces, if you can believe that. I will say that people who have been making stained glass for a while tend to advocate that you don't really need burnishing tools, and I don't understand why. I started to think that they're just kind of stuck in their ways, and if you can use a marker, then what would be the point of spending a couple more bucks on a burnishing tool? So during this project, I was still believing that I only needed a marker to foil my pieces and I would just get better at it. I was also using really cheap foil, but I don't think that really had the impact on this piece specifically. If anything, the cheaper foil was thinner, so it was easier to work with and smoothing it out with that marker. But shortly after this project, I invested in burnishing tools and it was a world of difference in foiling my pieces. I don't know why people stick to the marker. I really struggled with finding that perfect angle, and the curves were they were always terrible. As soon as I got the proper tools, my foiling improved. But it is all based on personal preference, and if you can make the marker work, then make that marker work. Honestly, at the time of me posting this video, you can get a set of 4 burnishing tools for around like $6, so they're not expensive at all. They really help with those textured pieces of glass too. I've heard that you can use a wine cork for the textured glass as well, and it works better than burnishing tools, but I've yet to actually test it out for myself. All I know is sticking to the marker was terrible advice, and I am learning to listen to everything and take it all in, but try your own way instead of just believing what other professionals are telling you. Now, when it came to soldering, I was still using my Weller, and I do stand by it that if I could get a different tip, I would still be using that beautiful iron. The heat was consistent and it was really easy to work with, but it wasn't made for stained glass, and I was just never going to get really good at soldering if I continued to use it. I do still find that the dot method works best for me, and the more advanced stained glass artists have told me that it leads to too much solder on your lines, which I definitely had on this piece, so I know there is logic behind the push for me to drag my solder on my iron, but let me tell you, it is not as easy as they make it look in their videos. But let's focus on this project because I will end up going into another tangent about how many different stained glass soldering irons there actually are and how the information people tell you is not universal. Soldering this Cardinal actually went pretty smoothly. I was surprised that my pieces fit as well as they did, even though there were some gaps I was nervous about going into it. This is a great time to mention that if you are just beginning or thinking about starting to make stained glass, you will absolutely learn the difference between a gap where you should recut your piece or a gap that's just going to sort of have a thicker solder line. And honestly, no one else is really going to notice. We are our own worst critics. Most of the imperfections that you see in your own pieces are not even going to register with anyone else, or at least not anyone else that doesn't make stained glass. And if you are just learning, it takes time to figure things out. Give yourself some grace in making those mistakes. And honestly, make those mistakes because it will help you understand the differences. I was terrified going into this that one of the gaps near the leaf was just going to completely destroy the entire look of this piece, and in the end, you couldn't even really notice. I was using liquid flux with this piece, and my honest opinion is to ditch the liquid flux and transition into a gel flux. There is a little bit of a learning curve with it, but the gel flux doesn't smoke as much, although you do need to clean your tip of your soldering iron more frequently if you are using a higher temperature. I knew that going into this project that I wanted to use U-came around the edge of the piece to finish it because I didn't know how to do beaded edge to save my life. It turned out that the struggles I was having with the beaded edge weren't me at all, but rather the soldering iron that I was using. That tip will never allow me to get a clean edge. What I didn't know before I tried to put the cane on was that there are actually 2 different types of cane, H-cane and U-cane. H-cane is generally what you see when someone's making the lead cane version of stained glass, like that window style or larger pieces. U-cane is generally what's used to frame your pieces. It's smooth on one side and has that indent on the other side for your glass to just kind of slip into. There are also two different sizes of U-cane. You can get the 5/64 inch thickness, which is what I was using here, but I did just order the thicker U-cane to try on a future piece to see if I like it better. Stretching your cane is extremely important. If you don't stretch it, you're going to have gaps between your glass and the cane itself, and it's harder to sort of make it fit with the curves when you're working with those more complex shapes. I also don't recommend trying to cut your cane to fit right away. Measure it again, and measure it one more time. Slowly chip away at that corner where it eventually meets, because you're going to be surprised at how little it takes to create a gap in the cane. Whether you want to use this piece to practice your beaded edge or try U-cane, this style project is perfect. The beaded edge is simple, it's just that straight line across, and it gives you a lot of practice in just sort of getting the hang of the beaded edge before you try it on a more intricate shape. Same goes for the U-cane. No matter which route you go, they're both perfect for a beginner who is just starting to learn how to make stained glass. I should also note that when it came to adding the U-cane around the edge, it was another personal preference if you keep your foil on the edge or take it off. Some people are good enough that they don't actually foil their edges at all to begin with, but my brain cannot handle that sort of pressure, so I foil all of it and remove it later if I choose to. And some people won't take the foil off the edges at all. They'll just try to tin the foil itself or adhere it to the U-cane. I've done both methods, keeping the foil on as well as removing it, and I think it depends on a few things like the tip of your iron. It's really difficult to solder or tin the foil underneath that U-cane, especially when using the 5/64 inch. So I personally just think it kind of looks a little bit messy if you're keeping your solder silver, but if you end up using the black patina, it kind of blends together so it's not as noticeable. However, if you cannot get your tip into those nooks, you're going to see copper because you're not able to tin it. So it's really just personal preference. If you do choose to remove it, make sure that you commit to it and you remove all of it around those edges. Every little flake of copper will show through, and if you solder it, you'll have these little randomly pieced solder pieces sticking around on the edges. It'll just look messy and it'll drive you crazy. I learned that the hard way with my corgi project, and I really regret not taking the time to clean those edges. Now, when it came time to adding hooks, don't do what I did. I have other videos that show how to add hooks properly into your piece. I shouldn't say that. If you're adding hooks that go into a joint, you're going to want to make sure there's a tail on it. If you've got a super lightweight piece that doesn't have a joint to go into, the way that I made the hook would work, just not for this pattern. The tail offers a little bit extra support to hold your piece up over time and just kind of secure the piece a little bit better when it hangs. My biggest advice for adding hooks is to make sure that you're adding them to the back of your piece. And if you plan ahead to know where you're actually going to add your hooks, it might help you in the bigger picture because you might find a different method that works better for you than the one that I do. I personally haven't gotten to that point in planning ahead yet, but if you do, you have the option of not soldering the joint where you know you're going to place your hook. It'll make adding that hook a little bit easier to sort of create a cleaner, more crisp look on the final piece because you won't have that excess sort of glob of solder. You can also use pre-tinned copper, which probably makes it a lot easier for people. If you're like me and just kind of being stingy and using whatever you have available, I tinned the copper myself. However, what I learned was to tin it before you actually place it on there because it'll heat up enough that it'll kind of come out of the solder if it's not embedded in there well enough. So basically, your hook is just going to continuously fall out if you're trying to tin it while it's in the piece. And a lot of people have jigs or something to hold up their hook, which will help as well. I just haven't really figured out what works best for me, so I still just do this weird two-handed method. I also no longer like to use chain on my pieces to hang them. I've transitioned to using twine. The biggest reason is that most people don't have jewelry tools on hand, so if they decide that they want a different length, it's kind of a big hassle for them. If you just have twine or some sort of ribbon, they can cut it off and replace it to a length that they prefer. And honestly, I just kind of like the look better, but that could be because I don't have black chain and most of my pieces are finished with black patina. When it comes to patina, here is what I have learned. The prep work is the biggest detail in getting a decent patina to adhere, but there's no real way to test it when you're prepping it to see if you're doing it well enough. It just takes practice. Recently, and I mean in the current time of me overdubbing this video, I have been struggling with patina. I had been reading that the brand that I use is just finicky, but then I started to really listen to what others were saying, what they did to prep it, and to get that dark, consistent look. I just tested it out this morning on a new piece I worked on, and it worked really well and fixed most of my issues, so I'm going to share it here with you. Steel wool. When you are cleaning off the flux, use steel wool. I used Dawn dish soap to clean it, and it worked beautifully. Scrub, scrub some more, and keep scrubbing. Rinse it off and go back to wash it and scrub it again. And when you think you're done scrubbing, keep scrubbing. The problem is that there's no real way to see if you've missed a spot until you're actually applying the patina. So you really have to spend the time just washing and scrubbing to get all of that flux off and prepping that solder. I've also recently learned that if you have hard water, you should really consider washing your pieces with distilled water. I'd only heard of using distilled water to rinse your piece after you patina, but washing in there makes sense. I haven't tested it out yet though, it's next on my list to try. All that I know is that my patina was spotty, had copper looking sections on it, and never really looked like a deep black color. When I used that steel wool, it all changed. I can tell that I still need some practice and to take more time scrubbing, but there was a huge difference. You can also use a magic eraser after you scrub the flux off and let it dry. It sort of helps to brighten up the patina once it's applied. Now with this piece, I used Cardinal car wax, and since then I've actually switched to Pledge. It's something I'm currently testing out. The car wax buffs nicely, but I can't quite figure out the perfect amount to apply. It seems like I always add too much and it keeps drying and hardening where I have to take a toothpick and kind of scrape it off multiple times as it continues drying after I buff it out. Pledge has been a lot easier to work with, and honestly, I can't really tell the difference in the shine between the two. Most people are going to use that to maintain their pieces anyway because that's what they're going to have on hand, so using it the first time around seems like a good option. The biggest thing to remember is to prep the patina. Rinse the patina off with distilled water within a few minutes of applying it. Let it dry completely before applying your finishing agent, whether it's wax or Pledge, and let the wax or Pledge dry completely or overnight before you buff it out with a microcloth. Hopefully some information in this video was helpful to someone who finds it. I know it is supposed to be mostly about the pattern itself, but I always find sharing beginner tips for stained glass to be helpful when sharing my projects because I'm sure that you're not watching this for the sound of my voice. The pattern itself was the first time in my stained glass journey where it all came together, so I really love it. But most importantly, it is such a great pattern for a beginner. When I started to purchase patterns, I was finding myself frustrated over and over again. They don't have to tell you if a saw or special tool is needed to complete a pattern. In fact, a lot of patterns are now AI generated and have cuts in them that you can't actually make. People just accept it and adjust the pattern on their own. But what's the point of me paying for a pattern if I have to spend the time correcting it and adjusting it? It just seems ridiculous to me. But this pattern is great, and the creator has other birds available as well that are similar and very beginner friendly. It's linked in the description, and just for the record, I don't get anything if you click on the pattern itself or make a purchase. I just think that despite my aggravation and rants about purchasing patterns, we should support small businesses. The pattern is beautifully created and no special tools are required, so give it a look if you're interested in creating your very own Cardinal. Until next time, stay glassy.